Hello everyone, my name's Mitch and today I'm going to be doing a review of Keep the Heroes Out. It's a great game that you should consider if you like dungeon crawlers with a Euro style feel, and it's especially good if you're a solo player like I am. In Keep the Heroes Out, you play a set of monsters out of 9 different types, and you're protecting your home, the dungeon, from heroes that are coming in trying to loot your treasure. The components and artwork are absolutely beautiful, and what you're looking at here is just the base game. You can actually upgrade some of the components and the heroes. One thing to be aware of, that even though it has a very cute artistic style to it, it is not what I would consider to be a gateway type of game, and it does have a family mode, so you can play with children or people that are new to gaming, but it's really a very puzzly Euro style game. It's really very good for those that are trying all the different types of characters, because each of the monsters plays differently, each of the heroes has special abilities. It's a very exciting experience. The game has both a rule book and a dungeon book. The rule book is easy to read and very artistic, and it has several pages that are very nicely laid out to show you the symbology of all the cards. The dungeon book has 20 different scenarios that you can play that have a nice narrative introduction. And there's also Chronicle mode, which is a type of a campaign in which you play the different scenarios, 4 of them at a time in different chapters. But don't think of this as a very rich, deep narrative kind of campaign. It's more the kind that you combine the scenarios together. Each monster has a special card that shows their special ability, their stats, like how many monsters there are, the health that they have, and how many cards they have in their starting deck. And they show also where you place the monsters and how many at the beginning of the game. So at the beginning of setup, you will take your monsters starting deck, shuffle it up, and draw 5, and then place your monsters in the dungeon. Each dungeon tile has a symbol in the upper left corner to show what type of dungeon room it is, and that will help you when you place your monsters and heroes in the dungeon. Also in the upper right, there is an activation that you can do for each dungeon. So for example, in this dungeon tile, you collect a gold, and in this dungeon tile, you trade in a gold to get an equipment card. So you'll notice that the dungeon tiles have doorways so as you connect them up so that the heroes and monsters can go through them. So you may rotate some of the dungeons sideways. In this particular case, we have a crossbone symbol up here, and that's where these gnoll monsters are first placed at the startup of the game. There are actually 2 different rooms of each symbol type. So for example, for the crossbones, there's the sewer and the beast trainer room. I could have placed gnolls in either of those 2 rooms. One thing that's very cool in the game is that there are tokens that you can activate with this hand symbol to turn them into portals so that you can transport from one dungeon room to another that may even be on the opposite end of the dungeon. This is a cooperative game, but solo players will be glad to know that you can play it as multi-handed cooperative, or you can play it true solo. You should pay attention to the fact that the different monsters do have different abilities, and they're organized in the rule book to show you which ones are focusing on attack and which ones are focusing on defense or support. The players always go first, and on their turn they play cards from their hand. They can play any number. In the gnoll starting deck, they have basically 3 types of cards. One type of card allows you to move and activate, or they can place a new monster in the dungeon. Another type of card allows you to attack, and if you're successful, you gain some gold. And then a third kind of card allows you to spend your gold to place 3 monsters in the same room that you are. So on your turn, you will be playing cards in order to place monsters in the dungeon, activate resources, attack heroes, and move through the dungeon to protect your dungeon from these invading heroes. On the hero's turn, you will flip over 1, 2, or 3 cards depending upon the difficulty and follow the actions described on the card. In this particular case, we will place 2 archers in the dungeon, one in each of the rooms with a crossbow symbol. There's also a special ability for each hero. An archer, for example, will attack one hero in a room closer to the dungeon. As heroes move through the dungeon, they try to open treasures, but it takes a certain number of heroes to open. So, for example, this treasure requires 2 heroes to open that treasure. So what the hero will do is you will turn over the token and they will become exhausted and wait for another hero to come into the room. When a hero is placed in a room with other exhausted heroes, they inspire those heroes, flipping them to the colored side up. And then they can perform other actions such as looting this treasure. And in doing so, they become exhausted, but they perform or gain the resource or treasure result on the back of the treasure token. So in this way, the heroes move through the dungeon, attacking monsters, looting treasure, and moving their way toward the vault or the treasure room. If they finally open this last treasure, you lose the game. If, on the other hand, the monsters can last through 2 waves of hero cards, they win the game. There are 4 different rooms where you can actually pay a resource to upgrade your deck by getting equipment, potions, scrolls, and beasts. So here's an example of what the cards look like, and the monster selects the appropriate card based upon whatever room they activated. So now let's talk a little bit about why this game may or may not be right for you. So let's start with the level of the game. If you're looking for a light family game or a gateway game, this is really not what you want. You can play it at that level. There is a level that's called family, but it's really a pretty hardcore kind of Euro type of game. So picking up resources and doing things. So it's really for people that game frequently, or else having one person who is a gamer helping the others to play. So this is really for people who like deck building and puzzling through a lot of different options of what you can do, collecting resources, and deciding how to interact in the dungeon. And this leads to the next point, that some people have complained about it being swingy nature or snowball effect, and to some extent that's correct, because let's give you an example here. We've got a lot of heroes that have entered the dungeon and either collected treasure or fought off monsters, and so they are all exhausted. There is a point that you can put the heroes in jail, but if you put a wizard in jail, he will actually break everyone out. And in that case, they will all flip over, reactivate, and you can have a cascade effect that goes all the way through the dungeon, and you could lose the game in that one turn. However, this is not like you roll the dice and can't defeat the monster. This is a situation in which you know that there's potential risk and you're going for the reward of gaining extra cards, but it didn't turn out the way that you wanted. So this is a very much a Euro planning type of thing. You know what the risks are. Also, as you reveal the heroes, these are called guild cards, they're open information, so you can organize them however you want to kind of get a sense of what statistically is most likely to happen. For example, in this case, if all 4 of the wizards have come out, I know that I can put somebody in jail safely. And as I look at the rogue, I know that the rooms that they have visited, and so that the only room that they could show up in next would be the crossbone rooms. So the results of what happens depend very much on the choices that you've made. So now let's talk a little bit about difficulty. The first thing to note is that the difficulty tiles, there's actually a known printing issue on the lowest level one. On side 1 it has showing 1 card, and then on side 2 it shows drawing 3 cards, but that's actually incorrect for the lowest level. You should actually be drawing 2 cards, but there are other tiles in the box, so it's easy to just replace it with the proper tile. But if you've seen some of the reviews on the game, there is a complaint that people have that the lowest level difficulty is pretty easy, and that's fine. It's called the family mode, but the next level is the challenging level. So the easiest level shows 1 card on the first wave and 2 cards on the second wave. The next level has 2 cards on the first wave and on the second wave, and the complaint is that that's actually too much of a gap. But the complaint is not just that there's a significant jump in the difficulty, it's also that on the next level difficulty, it's harder to get the upgraded cards for the deck building, and people really like doing that. But there's 2 answers to that. First of all, there are variants that are on Board Game Geek that you can find that make the levels you can easily adjust these. And you should look at in the forums on variants under normal difficulty for some suggestions to make that easy to upgrade. And that will also have an impact on how easy it is to gain the cards. But for the issue of gaining the proper cards, it's also very important to look at the board. Now, for each monster, the rulebook gives you pro tips on about which loot cards you should try to focus on for each individual monster. That's great, but for the more challenging levels, you want to pay attention to how close the rooms are to each other and whether you can cross over there. So, for example, here the vault is right next to the forge, so it's really easy to create equipment cards. And in this case, the graveyard is right next to the beast trainer, so it's very easy to get beast cards. The next concern that people have mentioned is that in the base game that has the heroes just as tokens, it's a little bit difficult to see the heroes because there's so much color in the dungeon tiles. Now, you can get the Guildmaster's Revenge that gives you hero meeples that are fairly thick, and when they're active, they're upright, and when they're exhausted, they're down. But the tokens themselves are actually not too bad. You do have to pay attention a little bit more. But one trick that I do is place all the heroes in the same location in all the dungeon rooms. So for example, I tend to put the treasure and the hero tokens in the lower right hand corner, and that way I can quickly scan all of the dungeon tiles to see whether or not there are heroes in the dungeon. In a similar way, sometimes people have complained about it's difficult to see the wall separation here because rooms don't have entrances on all sides. So in some cases there may be a wall preventing you from moving into another room. And that may be true, but if you just pay attention, it's not too much of a problem. And in many of the scenarios, the movement through the rooms is pretty obvious. It's only a handful of rooms in some of the scenarios that have that kind of wall problem. So if you're on the fence about the game, you probably want to consider that. But if you really find this game appealing, you shouldn't worry too much about that wall separation. It's not too much of an issue. One other concern that people have mentioned that you may want to be aware about is if you're interested in playing at higher player counts. As you play as a player, you may have up to 8 cards in your hand, and you can play each one of those. So each one of those could have a little bit of an AP nature to it. Do I move here? Do I go there? How to best use these cards. So it can take a while for making the optimal decisions. And so at higher player counts, it can tend to slow down. Now, personally, I play most of my games solo, so if you're a solo player, that shouldn't bother you at all. But it may be something to consider if you're actually thinking of at 4 or even higher player counts. Now, there is an alternative that I've thought of. I haven't tried this out, but it may work well. So, because basically, in the normal gameplay, you're going to be playing about 5 cards, maybe a little bit more, between the monster's turn and then the hero. So you play 5 cards, then the heroes go. You play 5 cards, the heroes go. So essentially, if you just make it so that the monsters play about 5 cards, the balance should stay the same. So think about this alternative. Let's imagine that you have 3 players playing. You could decide that each player is allowed to play 2 cards, and then after all of the monsters have gone, the heroes go. If you had 5 players, then each player would play 1 card, and then the heroes go. Like I said, that's just an idea to consider for the higher player counts, but it definitely works well at the lower player counts. So that's it for my review of Keep the Heroes Out. If you are looking for a Euro-style dungeon crawler that is beautiful and really fun to play, especially if you enjoy playing at the lower counts or if you're a solo player, this is a fantastic game. I hope you've enjoyed the review, and I hope you enjoy playing Keep the Heroes Out.